Wow, what a
Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Apologies for getting started a couple of minutes late. Thank you for your patience. Hi, all. Just going to give a couple more seconds to let everyone settle in. All right. 3:34. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. We're going to start off with some housekeeping, and then we will get started. I'm going to pass it over to you, Edna, for instructions.
Thank you. And hello, everyone. My name is Edna Santizo, and I'm going to be one of the Spanish interpreters for this session, along with my colleague Nancy Gallardo. I'm going to be providing instructions first in Spanish and then in English as to how to access the interpretation function. Buenas tardes a todos, soy Edna Santizo y vamos a darles instrucciones en cómo acceder a la función de interpretación. En un segundito van a ver en la parte baja de su pantalla un icono que dice interpretación. No está ahí en este momento, va a aparecer cuando termine las instrucciones. Cuando aparezca, por favor presione y seleccione el idioma de su preferencia, ya sea español o inglés. Y también presione donde dice Mute Original Audio o silenciar el audio original. Si está en una tableta o en un teléfono, va a haber 3 puntos o donde dice más. Presione, seleccione Language Interpretation, después el idioma de su preferencia y también Mute Original Audio. Y si necesita asistencia técnica, siempre puede dirigirse a nosotros a través del chat. Gracias. So hello everyone, in just 1 second, when I finish giving instructions, you're going to see an icon appear at the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer that says interpretation. When it's there, please click and select the language of your preference, either English or Spanish, and also mute original audio. If you're on a mobile device or a tablet, you're going to see 3 dots or where it says more, click, select language interpretation, then the language of your preference, and also mute original audio. And if you need technical assistance, please reach out to us via the chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edna. So the interpretation feature was just turned on. If you could take a moment, everyone, including presenters, please, if you can take a moment to go down to the globe icon, and under interpretation, you need to enter a channel. And so that's for everybody in the Zoom. Let me do it. Okay, I have entered my channel. Can everybody still hear me? Yes, all right. All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here today. We're very excited about this webinar and just have a few things to share with you. First off, just wanted to share a little bit of information about some of the coalitions that are making this presentation possible. I'm including links to these coalitions in the chat for everyone to look at independently. The Whole Child Equity Partnership is a coalition of a variety of advocates from across the state of California that are working to promote a whole child equity agenda for the state of California that seeks to improve the conditions under which children develop, learn, live, and play. You can find more information about the Whole Child Equity Partnership in the chat. Other things that made this possible was Around Birth Collective, who was also our deep partner in creating this series. And then, of course, Reimagine Child Safety Coalition, which many of the people that you'll hear from today are a part of. Next slide, please. To kick us off and really ground us today, I'm very, very honored to present to you Tina Rowe, a mother with lived experience. She's a core team member and leader for the Reimagine Child Safety Coalition. She's a lived expert and community consultant. Oop, typo there, sorry about that. And she's also the executive assistant to the CEO for CASA Los Angeles. So Tina, gonna pass it over to you to get us started.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to be doing some affirmations. I often do affirmations beginning of meetings. Most important thing we can do is believe and center ourselves. So if you want to repeat out loud with me or just in your hearts, you may. Triumphant divine, we are reimagining child safety and family liberation. We are architects of our lives. We build the foundation and choose its contents. Today, we are brimming with energy and overflowing with joy. Our bodies are healing more and more each day. Our minds are brilliant. Our souls are tranquil. Our thoughts are filled with positivity, and our life is plentiful with prosperity. We are courageous and stand up for each other. Our collective voice as parents and birthing people is gaining power and momentum. We are riding a wave of change and part of a paradigm shift happening now. We believe that children have inalienable right to be loved by their parents, families, and communities. We see our relationships becoming stronger and more stable each day. Our health and well-being are growing, expanding, and thriving. Our ability to conquer our challenges is limitless. Our potential to succeed is infinite. Each day we are closer and closer to connecting children with the right resources so that they have access to food, peace, safety, love, and play at birth and throughout their lives. We are blessed with an incredible family and wonderful friends. Our future is an ideal projection of what we envision now. Our dreams manifest right before our eyes. We radiate charm, beauty, grace. Our fears of tomorrow are simply melting away. Our path is carved towards greatness. We continue to lift each other up in positivity and belief so that we live loving, fulfilled, and healthy lives. We are at peace with all that has happened, is happening, and will happen. Our nature is divine. We are spiritual. Our lives are just beginning. We are more than conquerors. We are champions for birth justice and child equity. Thank you, guys.
Well, Tina, thank you so much. Thank you for being here with us and sharing your wise words. And thanks to everyone here for being here with us during a difficult week. But we're here together and we're here to learn together and try to, continue to center community and families. And, very lucky to just have everyone in the room with us. All right, let's keep on going here. We really want to hear from you. And so if you could just take a few moments in the chat to introduce yourself. We want to know your name. Are you a birth worker? Let us know. Are you a parent, a caregiver? Where in California are you? What's your county? Are there any fun facts about yourself that that you can share with us that can bring some smiles to our faces? I see a bunch of names here. Some of which are familiar to me, some new names. And so just very excited to learn a little bit about you and to have you introduce yourself in the chat. Hi, Faith. Hi, Gabrielle. Hi, Jazz. Hi, Jeanette. Lakeisha, I see you. Lauren. All right. Well, while you continue to introduce yourself, we will start to introduce ourselves and then really get to the meat of this presentation. Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Davis. My pronouns are she, her, ella. I'm the Director of Community Engagement and Advocacy at the Children's Partnership. I'm a proud member of the Reimagine Child Safety Coalition. And I'm a recovering attorney, which I just say as a joke, but it's also sort of true. I formerly represented youth harmed by the systems and victims and survivors of domestic violence. And I'm really happy to continue this work through the various coalitions. Next slide, please. Also with us today is the amazing Ebony Durham. Her pronouns are also she, her, and she is a senior community engagement and advocacy associate at the Children's Partnership. Ebony, I'm putting you on the spot for a quick second. Do you want to share anything else about how amazing you are?
Not really. I am amazing, but I'm just happy to be in this space with you all. And thank you for joining. I can't wait to hear this presentation.
Thanks, Ebony.
Thank you.
All right. Two more slides and then we're going to get to it. Housekeeping. So yes, there is going to be a recording of this webinar and it will be sent out in email to everyone. Q&A. If you have questions, we will try our very best to keep track of the chat. It is a lot easier, though, I will say, to keep track of questions in the Q&A feature. And so there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you can submit questions through there, then wonderful. If you put them in the chat, we'll track them down and also address them at the end of the webinar. And lastly, closed captioning, you click the live transcript button from the in-meeting Zoom toolbar and select one of the options from the menu to access that feature. Next slide, please. All right, today's conversation. We are a fabulous, amazing guest speaker and expert speaker is here to talk about a variety of really important topics that have come up in so many different conversations that we've had throughout this webinar series. She's going to go over what is family policing, how do families get entangled with the system, families' rights during a family policing investigation. And then at the very end, we're going to go through and have some time for questions and answers, some resources, and then finish up with a raffle and evaluation. Next slide, please. All right, without further ado, I'm introducing you all to Keisha Dorsey, she, her, amazing advocate for families and children, civil rights movement lawyer, adjunct law professor, and just all around badass. I'm very happy to have you here, Keisha, and I will pass it on to you.
All right. Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm also really excited to be here. Liza and I were speaking the other day. We were just talking about how, there's a lot going on this week, right? I think some of us are a little disappointed regarding the election results. But I just wanted to first thank Tina for grounding us this afternoon. And also just say that the power is in the people, right? And we have work to do. And part of doing that work is knowing what our rights are. So I think that this conversation that we're going to be having today is timely. And I'm really excited to just dive in. Really quickly, before I get into the presentation, I do like to start off by just sharing with you guys really quickly what my why is, right? Why do I do this work? Why do I call myself a family defender? Because I also would like to call myself a recovering attorney at some point. But I actually got into this work because I was a student at UCI and I was learning and doing research about moms who were incarcerated and who were coming home only to find that their children had been adopted. And not because they had been accused of abusing or neglecting their children or had any crimes to that end, but because of this national law called the Adoptions and Safe Families Act, or ASFA, which says that if your child's in the foster system and you do not get them home within 15 out of the last 22 consecutive months, in order for states to draw down on the billions of dollars of funding that is allocated towards the family policing system, states are required to initiate termination of parental rights proceedings. And so mamas were coming home and literally their rights to their children were being, terminated, which we call the civil death penalty, because there's very few mechanisms to get that reversed. And so doing that research, I would always have to ask for additional time because I was just so just engulfed with all of the stories, the accounts of the families that I was reading about. At the time, the average rate for incarceration was 18 months. So these mamas were just 3 months shy of having their parental rights terminated. And also, I was learning about a system that had impacted my entire life. So I grew up here in the, I guess, family policing system in Los Angeles County. It came in at the age of 2, aged out of the system. And just by doing this research, I just was like tunnel vision. This is what I want to do. It's the reason why I went to law school. And it's what I'm doing now. So that is my why. I also just put here Shattered Bonds. For those of you who've never read this book, it is an amazing book by Professor Dorothy Roberts. And that really shapes, I think, the work that I do in the context in which I do this work. And now, as Tina affirmed, right, just in the affirmations today, in regards to the fact that there's so much more education, right? People are understanding the ways in which the system operates and the impact that it has. Is very intentional as it pertains to families of color, specifically Black families, Indigenous families, Latin families. I think it was a gift to me to have read that book before I started as an attorney. All right, next slide. All right, so today we're going to be talking about reproductive rights, right? Birth justice in the context of the family policing system. We can go to the next slide. The reason why I feel like this is so important is because, and I didn't really realize this, I'm starting to see it more now that I'm myself am getting more involved in the reproductive justice work and birth work, which is that we talk often, when we talk about reproductive justice rights, we talk about the right to have an abortion, right? We talk about birthing rights, the right to choose how we want to give birth, the right to survive childbirth, to be believed, right, when we say that there's something wrong. We talk about the right to, to survive, but we don't talk about enough, I think, when we talk about reproductive justice, is the right to parent the children that we bring into this world, right? The right to enjoy motherhood, for your child to enjoy, their first few, hours here on this earth without the surveillance, the trauma that happens when CPS investigations happen, right? And so that is something that we're going to be talking about, and how do you protect yourself from that? All right, so why is this important? Well, in LA County, and I know that everyone here is not from LA County, okay? But I think that in the state of California, this quote unquote liberal state that just reaffirmed slavery in our country, we have the largest local family policing system in the nation, okay? Outside of the entire state of Florida, the one little county, LA County, has the largest family policing system in the country. And Black children in LA County only make up 7.4% of the child population, but we are nearly 60% of CPS investigations. We are also nearly 1 in 3 children in the family policing system in Los Angeles. California, just as a whole statewide, is Black children make up 5%. So we make up even less of a percentage of the entire state, but we make up 21.8% of family policing cases in California. Indigenous children only make up 1.7% of the child population, yet they are 6.8% of family policing cases. Hispanic children, 52% and 50% of family policing cases. And it's also important because oftentimes when we talk about the trauma vis-a-vis the family policing system, and just so everybody knows, just in case, so we're all on the same page. When I talk about family policing, you may call it Child Protective Services. Every agency has its own name for the way that they use that umbrella term. So for example, in LA County, it's the Department of Children and Family Services. Some counties, it's the just Children Family Services, right? So I may use those words interchangeably, but family policing, that's what I'm talking about, okay? Just so that we're all on the same page. But typically when we're talking about family policing, we're talking about the trauma and the harms of the system, we talk about family separation, okay? We don't talk about the investigation part of these cases, right? And there's a lot of harm that happens just in the investigation. It is not innocuous to get a knock on your door. It is not innocuous to be visited at the hospital, right? It is a very traumatic experience for children and for their families, where they experience a lot of fear and anxiety. There's a violence that happens during these investigations. Sometimes law enforcement comes alongside the social worker. I have personally experienced, well, not experienced, but had represented folks who law enforcement has come, literally took their children at gunpoint from them. There is obviously the separation trauma, or like just the idea, right, or the fear of that happening. Stigmatization that occurs when your neighbors see, right, that there are folks showing up at your front door. And also community distrust that happens down, right, as well, where the community trust breaks down because you're not sure who called in the investigation. There's secondary trauma that happens where moms and parents are having to see their children experience, these investigations that can be very intrusive. Body searches, sometimes there's very intrusive physiological examinations, gynecological exams. There's a disruption of the parent-child bond in the sense that the child, is in a position where their parent often is deemed powerless to help them. And the person who can stop all of this trauma from happening, and the child sees is unable to do so. There's exposure, right? Children being asked questions about their parents, or being asked questions about topics that are maybe not age appropriate or that they never knew about. There is the risk of being placed on a child abuse registry, what we call the CACI registry here in California. And this is the registry that's maintained by the Department of Justice. And in California, if you do not get off that list, and I think the period of time, it's either 30 or 60 days, that you have to challenge getting off that list, then you're essentially on that list for a lifetime. You are on that list until you're 99 years of age, okay? That can impact your employment. It can impact where you go to school. It can impact situations where if you wanted to have, a loved one in your home, a niece, a nephew, a grandchild, by way of being on this list, you would be prohibited from doing so. People experience postpartum depression, right? So in the context of family policing and reproductive justice, moms who are releasing all types of hormones, right, as a result of the fear of these investigations, having depression, and so that also is some trauma that happens during investigations. And this is just a graph, and this is data that was taken by the University of California, Berkeley. I'll like to include this slide because I want people to know I don't get this data from my own conspiracy theories or my own, I have not represented everyone. I can't say 20, 30%, right? This is data that's collected by credible, institutions like California, like UC Berkeley. I get the data from Health and Human Services, from the federal government itself, right? From AFCAR's reports. And so, the numbers do not lie, right? So we can go to the next slide. Some have called this system essentially the new Jim Crow, right? The assault on, mothers of color, the punishment of poverty that happens. Sometimes people accuse me of being okay with child abuse. I am not okay with child abuse, and I would not be having this presentation if we saw numbers like we see in C and neglect, if those were abuse, okay? And not getting too deep into things, but I think it's important for folks to know in the context of the family policing system that prior to the 1960s, okay, neglect was not a reason in which children could be separated from parents or these cases be filed. Neglect was added when the federal government said that states were required to invest in Black families, so support Black families, give resources to Black families, and that the exception to that is if you remove their children and have them live elsewhere. That's when neglect got added. And throughout this country, neglect legally is not defined. And in most states, and where it is defined, including here in the state of California, really what we're doing is punishing poverty, even though we say we don't punish poverty. Okay. And so we are literally taking children from their parents and taking parents' children from, parents and taking parents' children due to poverty. Okay. And these are numbers, these are the national numbers from 2022. Okay. 74% of cases were neglect cases. Also, for by way of visual, and this is California data, again, taken from the University of California, Berkeley, that California does have a definition for neglect. And California also separates neglect between general neglect and severe neglect, right? So for those of you who are, watching this presentation, who are like, well, I could see some circumstances where, somebody is severely neglecting their children, and then that might be, a reason to justify taking the children. Look at how low those numbers are. Okay, and this is the last 10 years. So from October of 2012 to October of 2023, this is what that data looks like when we talk about severe neglect cases, as opposed to general neglect, this top line here, this orange line at the top. Okay, so there's a huge disparity, and I think it's really important to note, right, that what the media puts out in regards to these cases, that there's children, who are being, abused, and they're being, sexually assaulted, and not that that doesn't happen, okay? But the majority of the cases, the majority of the reasons why we have and operate this violent system is due to cases that could be categorized as poverty and punishment of poverty. All right, so that's the why, right? That is why this topic is so important. And so the question then is, how do families get entangled within the family placing system? First is there's a call to the quote unquote CPS hotline, okay? And remember I told you guys, this is how many children are being impacted by this investigation. 3.9 million calls to the hotline happened in 2020. 3.9 million calls, okay? And a majority of these calls to the hotline, there may have been an investigation, but majority of them are unfounded. And then the remaining ones, as we see, are neglect. A lot of them are neglect. And then at this stage of the family placing case, and when I talk about the stages or a family placing case, I'm talking from the moment of the hotline call to a petition being filed in court to the case resolving, okay? So just this very part, what we call the front door of the system, Black children are reported to the hotline twice as often as white children. So who's calling the hotline? You can go to the next slide. So majority of the folks calling the hotline are what we call our helping professionals or mandated reporters, okay? And you'll see, and again, for the purposes of today's conversation, that a majority of folks calling are medical personnel, okay, at 22%. So now I want to talk about the typical scenarios in regards to the calls to the hotline that we see in the context of reproductive justice and family placing. And you'll see here I put a graphic of a hospital bed, right? And the reason for that is because I never like to use absolutes, but I would say in general, when folks are giving birth in settings like their homes or like in birthing centers where they often have a more intimate relationship with their the birth workers who are providing services for them, there's very rarely calling any like calls to the hotline. Okay. In fact, I don't believe that they are even considered to be mandated reporters. So typically what we see is situations of surveillance. So for example, when parents have children and they've gone through the system, and then every child that they have thereafter, sometimes there is surveillance that happens. And that is actually a part of my personal story. My siblings and I'm one of 8. And, when my mom would give birth to children, they literally would call the woman who raised me, my foster mom, and they would call her and ask her, does she want another child? So it was like my mom, every time she had a baby, the CPS was already aware and they were monitoring her, and she didn't get to keep a majority of the babies that she brought into this world. My youngest brother, my mom had when she was in custody, and she was able to keep him because my daddy got him from the hospital, and they didn't track him. But the rest of us all, there was surveillance that occurred. Another way that we see screenings happen is through pause talks, right? So babies who are born with any type of substance in their system or test positive, or the mom test positive. We see scenarios with people making birthing choices, right? So someone saying that they want to exercise their birth plan, or they don't want to give their child vitamin K, or they don't want to sign a birth certificate, right? We've seen, those types of calls to the hotline. We've seen calls to the hotline for people seeking help, right? Moms who are struggling, for example, with breastfeeding, and maybe the baby is not getting enough nutrients, and they go and they're trying to get help, and then they now accuse them of neglecting their kid, or medically neglecting their child. Or I've had cases and seen cases where children maybe suffer an injury in their infancy. The parent goes to get help at the hospital, and there's a call to the hotline. And so, or there's awareness that maybe a parent is struggling in a domestic violence relationship with a newborn child, and there's a call to the hotline. So those are the typical scenarios that we see in the context of, reproductive justice, of birthing people, and the family policing system. So what if the referral gets screened in? So if the call is made to the hotline and social worker says, yes, we think that this is something that we should look into, an investigation essentially begins. And the text here that I use, and often y'all listen, I don't make things up. I don't try to be creative. I just use the policy manuals that the family police people use, okay? So what happens? This is from the DCFS policy, what they say happens if they decide to do an investigation. So they typically keep their investigations open for 30 days. I've seen that be 30 to 90 days, depending on what county in California. I always like to tell folks this 30 days is not mandated by law. It's just internal policies that the different agencies have. The social worker will continue to investigate the child situation and determine whether or not the case should be open, meaning there should be a case filed in court. During the period of the 30 days, they're usually going to review your family's history with the department or with the agency. And I highlight this because you guys will start to see, and I'm going to point out where we see a lot of overlaps with the criminal carceral system, right? So your history, so every time there's a call to the hotline, it's treated kind of like how someone's priors are treated in the criminal context, right? So you could have multiple calls to, the hotline. And as you can see, that's not unlikely to happen if you are a person of color. But that is used as something to determine whether or not they should do an investigation. Whether or not they're going to open up a case against you. Also, they may contact the reporter, the person who called into the hotline. I think this is an area where this system differs from the criminal carceral system, which is people can literally anonymously call the hotline. And when I say anonymously, meaning that you are not able to know who the person is that called. And you are not able to identify who that person is. So in a criminal context, if someone says that you committed a crime, you have the right to confront the person who accused you of the crime. In this context, when your family's like existence is in jeopardy, you don't have that right to know. Okay? And I don't understand the rationale behind it, because the majority of the people calling are law enforcement, medical personnel, teachers, right? So not people who are like, oh, what they typically say is, oh, we want to protect the identity. We don't want to discourage people from calling the hotline. The mandated reporters are not going to be discouraged from calling the hotline, okay? So it really, in my opinion, jeopardizes and really infringes upon a parent's due process rights or their ability to protect their families when they're not able to identify who the person was that was calling. Maybe it's somebody, like schools do this all the time. If you're advocating for your children, special education services, they may call the hotline on you, okay? Or doctor using it and weaponizing it against you because you decide you want to exercise your birth plan. So then they call the hotline. And you can't even really address why the call was made because you're not entitled to know who the person is. I did change this part because of our presentation. So on their website, it says that they're going to come to the house to interview you. But typically in the context of these cases, they're coming into the hospital to interview you and to talk to you about, the allegation or the referral that was made to the hotline. I say interview nicely, really, I think it's more akin to an interrogation. They also will talk to all the parties involved, including, if there's multiple parents, the children, their siblings, and other adults in the home. So it's really important that, and I've been trying to sound this alarm. If anyone follows me on social media, you know that I am a broken record when I tell folks that when you are dealing with CPS agents, social workers, they are government agents, okay? And in a criminal context, we would never tell anyone to talk to the police without counsel, okay? You have to treat and look at social workers as the family police. They say that they're there to help, but the experiences of families, especially families of color, is that they're not there helping. Their job is to collect evidence against you to support the referral that came into the hotline, okay? And we don't have the equivalent that folks have in the criminal context of Miranda rights, where the police have to tell people, hey, you have the right to an attorney before you speak to me, because anything you say to me can and will be used against you in a court of law, right? We don't have that equivalent here in California, right? We don't have a family Miranda that says, social workers have to advise you that what you say to them during these investigations or interrogations, whatever you want to call them, will be used against you in court. And the experiences of a lot of the families that we experience is that if they do file in court, it's not even just that they're using the statements, but they're taking the statements out of context. They are not accurately reporting what was said during these interviews. They're not allowing parents to record them so that they can have an accurate, of reporting to the court. And so, one of the things that was brought up is that I do civil rights litigation, and people ask me all the time, don't social workers have qualified immunity? And the answer is yes. But let me tell y'all, we have no issue with getting past qualified immunity because of how frequently social workers lie in their reports. And lying in their reports allows for us to get around the qualified immunity piece. Okay, so it's really important to know that what you say can be used against you in court. During a CPS investigation, you are not entitled to have an attorney, meaning an attorney doesn't have to be provided to you. You can hire an attorney, but the court is not appointing attorneys to you. And to me, this is the most critical part of a CPS case, because the information when I'm in court and I'm fighting to get people's children home, or I'm fighting to get a case closed, I'm fighting against statements that are attributed to my clients that they supposedly gave during the investigation. Okay. So most people are not represented by an attorney during investigations. Also, few attorneys specialize in CPS investigations, or they adopt the language of DCFS or the agency. So you can go on people's websites, they'll tell you if a social worker tells you to take a drug test during an investigation, you should take a drug test. They'll tell you if CPS comes to your door and even if you don't want them coming into your house and they don't have a warrant, let them in, right? But that is not the law. You don't have to do those things, right? And what I like to do is tell people at least what your rights are. I think I also have a moral obligation to tell you that if you don't unfortunately have an attorney, that sometimes exercising those rights could end up in a worse situation. But what I will tell you is that every time I've represented folks who wanted to exercise their rights, and I get pushed back, and I have to educate the social worker about what my client's rights are and their attorney about what my client's rights are, that they have not, been used to penalize my clients. Social workers prey on your lack of knowledge. They also prey on the fact that there is a power imbalance. And there's more of a power imbalance when you're in a hospital setting, because it's not only the social worker that's in a position to really, impact your family, but also the hospital as well. And hospitals, unfortunately, sometimes work in tandem with the social worker to do things like place hospital holds on your children to, justify social workers coming in and interrogating you. All right, so at the end of an investigation, these are the outcomes. It can be unfounded, inconclusive, or substantiated. If a investigation is deemed to be unfounded or inclusive, most agencies have a policy that they will not file a case in court. But if it is substantiated, there is a high likelihood that it will be filed against you in court, where they might ask you to submit to what they call a safety plan. All right, now I want us to just watch really quickly just an example of a family policing case investigation that happened here in California.
Experience there. A Los Angeles couple wanted to welcome their firstborn child with a private birth at home, but they took a real turn when they had to go to the hospital, and later police showed up with guns at their door. Now they want answers, and so does a local lawmaker. For the first time and only on NBC4, the parents share their story with NBC4's Beverly White.
Kayla Love and Kahari Jones are thrilled about their daughter, Fari Love Jones, born at home on June 27th.
I started feeling pain at 9 o'clock. She was here by 9:15. So it wasn't time for a doula, midwife, or anybody to get there.
We had an emergency birth. We wanted a home birth, but we still was trying to figure out what we really wanted to do.
Since Kayla had complications, paramedics were called. The couple says paramedics declared the baby healthy and rushed everyone to County USC Medical Center. That's where the couple declined to let doctors draw the baby's blood.
We say, no, we prefer for our child to be seen by a private physician. We do not want your services. We deserve that right to deny.
The couple says that's when things took a hostile turn, and doctors asked if Kayla had hepatitis, and a social worker and LAPD asked about domestic abuse in the home.
And the officer was like, as a mother, she was like, don't you care about your daughter? Don't you want to answer these questions and get this over with?
Kayla opted to discharge early and go home with her family. That night, the couple says the social worker walked in with police.
I just want to make sure that you stay safe, man.
That's the voice of a concerned neighbor who filmed the LAPD detaining Kahari.
Between 10 to 15 officers came up in our home, pointing guns at me while I'm holding the baby, and over a health and wellness check, what they claim to be.
LA County USC Medical Center issued this statement. When there are concerns about the health and welfare of a minor, our medical staff have obligations to report such matters to appropriate social welfare authorities so they can investigate the safety of the home environment. The couple and their state senator dispute such concerns.
USC is in my district, and so I am expecting a call from them. And LAPD obviously serves my district, and I'm expecting a call from them.
This is predatory. They are just going for people that they feel like they can be a victim, and they didn't know who they was dealing with. We're not letting that slide.
We asked LAPD to comment on this matter and were told to expect a reply by the end of the week. The couple believes someone provided police with keys to enter their apartment. They've got questions and now plan legal action. In downtown LA, I'm Beverly White, NBC4 News.
Okay, so while we're pulling up the slides, so I wish I could say that this was an isolated, situation that only happens, to Kayla and Kahari and their family. But this is the experiences that a lot of folks have in regards to, birthing, children, and then having law enforcement come. You see that some of the harms that we talked about earlier on in the conversation occurred in this context. And I'm thinking of another case that, of a mama that I'm supporting who decided to not sign the birth certificate. There were some other issues too, but she was released from the hospital. And at 1 o'clock in the morning, law enforcement showed up at her home. Right. And so these are not experiences that people should be having when they are simply exercising their birthing options. Their children are otherwise healthy. And it does impact the children and the families. All right. So now I want to talk about what are your rights during the CPS investigation, and also what rights you don't have. So the first one we already kind of talked about, which is like you don't have the right to, we can go back to that slide really quick. You don't have the right to know who called the hotline, okay? And again, that becomes problematic because if you are not aware of who called, you can't maybe talk about what the motivation behind that person calling was, or what the bias was behind that person calling. And also people abuse the hotline because they know that they can shield themselves from being questioned about why they're calling the hotline. You do have the right to know the specific allegation against you, okay? And when I say specific, so if you're not represented by an attorney, okay, because if you're represented by me, and most attorneys, they're going to ask, what is the specific allegation? Them saying, oh, we got a referral of abuse or neglect is not specific. Specific would be like in this example with Kayla and Kahari, you wouldn't allow us to draw your baby's blood, okay? So you want to know what the specific allegation is and only answer questions pertaining to that specific allegation. Because what social workers do during these interrogations is they're going to ask you about all the other reasons and ways in which they could file a petition against you. So I've seen cases where the referral came in for one thing, but the petition's filed for something completely different because the referral is unfounded. But then they ask questions like, have you ever been diagnosed with a mental health disorder? Or is there domestic violence in the house? Is there, do you use any drugs? They don't say, or do you have a substance use disorder issue? They specifically will just ask, do you use drugs? And that could be enough. They will ask about, criminal history, right? And file petitions saying that someone's child's at risk because someone has a criminal record, right? So you want to only answer the questions that are specific to the allegation. And if they say to you, because this is what they say to me, so I know they're going to say this to you, if you don't have an attorney, they say, oh, well, we're the Department of Children and Family Services, so we need to ask these other questions so we can see how we can support the family. And my response to them is, it's okay, I can help them. We don't need your support, okay? So, we're just here to answer the questions in regards to the specific allegation. We can go to the next slide. You have the right to not only know the specific allegation, but also to have it in an accessible format and pertains to language and if you have some needs in regards to disability. So this is the right, so as far as hospital holds are concerned. So this is only again pertaining to California. It comes out of our Welfare and Institutions Code 309A. You guys will get a copy of these slides. But basically, the hospital is allowed to do a hospital hold if the person is essentially described under the neglect statute, whether it's severe or general neglect, or the child has been abandoned. And the social worker has reasonable cause to believe that the child has an immediate need for medical care. Okay, so that's one way that they can do it. And again, in all this, both have to be true. There has to be either neglect or abandonment and an immediate need for medical care. Or if that's not the scenario, then the child has to be in immediate danger of physical or sexual abuse, or the physical environment has to pose an immediate threat to the child's health or safety. Next. During a investigation as a parent, you have the right to protect your children from being strip searched, from engaging or having to undergo intrusive medical tests and examinations. You have the right to not to say that your child cannot have nude photography taken of them. We can skip this slide really quick. And the next, oh, this one's important. So, sorry, go back really quick. So as it pertains to pause talks babies, because this one comes up a lot, what our county has said, and they issued a letter, it's called All County Letter 17-92, and I will provide these documents to you. A positive toxicology screen alone at the time of birth is not a sufficient basis for reporting or calling the hotline, okay? The hotline should only be called if there are other factors present that indicate that there's a risk to the child. So we can go to the next slide. So what the letter says is you're going to want to look at the AFGAR scores, the neonatal scores of the child. Does the child have withdrawal symptoms, right? All of these would be contained in their birth records and their medical records. Does a child have pre-existing conditions, right? What are the needs of the baby? They're going to be looking to see, you know, did you receive prenatal care, right? Is there a history of substance use disorder and treatment, right? And so you'll have a list of all of these. And one of the things I just want to highlight before we move on to the next slide is that we talked about the numbers, right? And some people are like, this will never happen to me. I'm a good parent. There's amazingly good parents, y'all, who are experiencing CPS investigations. And if you are a Black mama or daddy on this call, you are 1 in 2. It's a 1 in 50% chance that CPS is going to come knocking on your door. If you are a parent who is not of color, you're looking at least 1 in 3. Okay, so it is likely. And so I say that because all of the things that are on this list, you're going to want to keep. You're going to want to make sure you have access to your, your child's birth records, their medical records. You're going to want to, keep track of, prenatal appointments that you've attended, and things of that nature. Next. All right, this is another slide. So California Dignity in Pregnancy and Childbirth Act, Health and Safety Code 123630.1 also underscores, Black mortality rates, right? And says that every person shall be entitled to dignity and respect during and after pregnancy and childbirth. During and after, right? Pregnancy and childbirth. So the after part is the family policing system and the ways in which the family policing system surveils families. And also, in the context, again, of substance use disorder, that substance use disorder is considered to be a disability and is protected under the California Dignity in Pregnancy and Childbirth Act. Next. Also important to note the legislative intent behind the act, which says that it is the intent of the legislator to reduce the effects of implicit bias in pregnancy, childbirth, and postnatal care. okay, so that all people are treated with dignity and respect by their healthcare providers. Showing up to people's house at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning after they've just been discharged from the hospital, they're giving birth, is not dignity and respect. Showing up next to someone's hospital bed after they've just given birth is not dignity and respect. Showing up with law enforcement guns drawn is not dignity and respect, right? And again, unless there's an immediate threat to this child, the actions of the family policing system that are typically done should not be done. Next. All right. So this is just a list of all of the items that I would recommend you get, or things that you should do. Really quickly, we already talked about prenatal records, making sure that, you're taking photos and videos of your babies, not only because it's good to have them and you'll never regret having photos and videos of your babies, but also I can't tell you how powerful that evidence is when I'm able to show, and social workers saying that the child's not cared for, that the child has been abused, and we see these beautiful babies that are perfectly healthy and fine. Getting to know your pediatrician, popping back up really quick to the hospital hold versus social hold. I'm sorry, guys, I'm running out of time, so that's why I'm speeding through. But this one's really critical. Some of you, and I found this out actually through one of my clients, who they were holding her in the hospital, and she had already been cleared by her OB. She had been there for a couple of days already post giving birth. And she just was like, why am I here? Why can't I leave? And then she found out that she was on a social hold, not on a hospital hold. So there was no medical reason to hold her or her child in the hospital. And so if you're on a social hold, you can leave the hospital whenever you want, and it's not against medical advice. It's only against medical advice if you are on a hospital hold and you leave, and that you only can be placed on a hospital hold if there's a medical issue. Okay, not that your baby tested positive. If your baby tested positive and is still born perfectly healthy and fine, that baby can go home. Okay, and you are not required to stay in the hospital because a social worker wants to come talk to you, and their RDO day was on a Saturday, and they want you to stay until Monday so that they can get there to talk to you. Okay. You can get second opinions. So, I'm supporting a mom right now who they're saying, the baby is not low birth weight, but the baby has low weight. And her pediatrician is like, the baby's fine. He's just a small child. He's healthy. But CPS has gotten involved, and CPS thinks that they know better than the doctors. And they're now making her force feed her baby under the threat of, if he doesn't gain weight, then we're going to take him from you. Okay. And so you can go get a second opinion. Anything they make you sign in the hospital, social workers, make you sign, you can say, I need to review this first, and contact an attorney and have an attorney review that with you before you sign that document. And if you sign documents, y'all, for the love of God, I see this happening all the time, get a copy of the document that you signed. Do not let them tell you can't have a copy. That's crazy. You are entitled to have a copy of any document that you sign. Okay. And if you can, call a lawyer to level the playing field, right? I do offer free 15-minute consultations for folks, but I also offer, I think a very reasonable fee for a, more in-depth consultation, so that we can walk through the specific circumstances of what you are experiencing, so that if you can't afford for full representation during an investigation, at least you have some idea of how to navigate an investigation. And I know that there's other attorneys who are very passionate about this as well, who will do the same. Next. All right. So do we have questions? I know that was a lot.
I think we do have a few questions. Ebony, do you want to share those?
Yeah, there is a question in the Q&A chat from Christina. She says, can you clarify if the rights during CPS investigation that were shared only apply to California, LA County cases, or do these same rights apply to other states and counties?
So let me just say this. There are some rights, which we didn't go into depth about, that apply across the country. So regardless, for example, of if you have a actual Miranda, family Miranda in your state, you do have the right to hire an attorney during an investigation and before you speak with a social worker, okay? That's across the country. You also have the right under the Fourth Amendment, that's a broad right, that is the Constitution, it applies to everybody living in in this country, right? To not have social workers come into your home unless they have a warrant, exigent circumstances, or voluntary and informed consent, okay? That's a right that applies across. The specific rights that I was talking about, like Welfare and Institutions Code 309A, the county letters that went out, the county letters don't even apply across the state of California, they apply to LA County, right? Those are specific to the state of California, if that helps.
Thank you. We do have another question. Many people think that if they call the hotline, they're going to help families get connected to help and support, not harm. Can you say more about the reality of whether CPS social workers actually provide supports and helps to families?
So I'm going to speak about, right? Eliza says she did this too before, representing folks who are victims of or survivors of domestic violence, folks who have housing insecurity, folks who have, need childcare, right? They're not giving those things out, guys. They will take your children. And I think that the safest space to get those is get it through the community. The individuals who quote unquote can help you or say that they can help you are also the same individuals that can put a recommendation into the court to take your children from you. They're also the people that could put a recommendation into the court to terminate your parental rights. And so if I saw, 74% of these cases are neglect, and we're paying foster parents and people to take care of children outside of the home. If those numbers were different, I would say they're doing what they're going to help you. But the help would look like all them cases, we're giving that money to the families so that those families can support and take care of their own children. And we're not doing that. Okay. So that's not what we see. CPS is the family police, no matter how they want to dress it up, no matter what type of lipstick they want to wear that day, they are the family police.
Yeah, if there are any other questions, if you can add them in the chat. But I did just want to add to your point, Keisha, about experiences with families who where there's domestic violence involved. In the last few years of my legal career, I was representing parents, oftentimes mothers, who were victims or survivors of domestic violence. And when they finally went and sought help, that is the thing that triggered the investigation. And so it wasn't anything else. And you've said this, right, in your presentation. It was actually going to ask for help to get out of that situation. And instead, what actually happens, to your point about them not supporting, is that what they do is watch their back, right? And so they remove the child, probably, send the child elsewhere, and then the two parents are left to basically fight it out and try to figure it out in court. And so you have victims and survivors of domestic violence who did not have any other charge against them other than what they call failure to protect, for allowing basically their child to witness or live in a household where domestic violence is present, which is wild because it absolutely undermines the cycle of abuse and the rights and realities that victims have to face, right? And so, you know, the fact that the parent, the victim or survivor of domestic violence is charged with something in dependency court, and then the abuser is charged for their own, you know, actual physical violence or abuse, but they're still both being charged. They're still both having to fight for their child. And oftentimes for folks that, you know, understand domestic violence, you know that the power imbalance in a domestic violence household is not equal. And so what I saw happen in many of my cases was that both parents are trying to figure out a way to meet all the requirements put on them in the court, but without any supports. And so if I had a client that was a woman, victim survivor of domestic violence, they left the household, are now in a shelter or homeless. They have no job because their partner didn't allow them to. You know, they're alienated from their family from years of abuse, and they have no resources. Child Protective Services, the family regulation system, is not there trying to support that mother, that victim, that survivor to get the things that they need in order to create a safe, according to their standard, home for them to have their child back. Instead, they create this rat race where oftentimes the abuser, the person that caused harm, it has an advantage because they have a job, the apartment is under their name or the house, they have a car, and they're the ones that are ending up getting custody of the child, which then just causes this perpetual cycle of going back into the system of incarceration, of harm and trauma. And so, you know, I mean, in that entire situation, the family regulation system does not go in there. They do not connect you to housing. They don't help you apply for food stamps. They don't help you apply to Medi-Cal. They don't help you connect to mental health supports. You know, at most, really, that I saw from my experience with my clients was that at the very most that they did was give a list of referrals. And oftentimes those referrals are completely outdated. And folks are calling these services, but many of them don't even exist anymore. That's not support. And that's not what people think is happening when they're reporting. So that, you know, if there's people that are, you know, well-meaning people trying to get support for these families, they think that something's going to happen that isn't a reality, right? Like Keisha said, it's community-based organizations, it's coalitions, it's your neighbors, your family, it's, you know, places of faith, all of those community-based places that folks actually get support and help from without the policing and the trauma piece.
And I'm looking at a case plan right now, y'all, and I don't see, it says drug and alcohol services, parenting, individual counseling, domestic violence counseling, sex abuse counseling, mental health counseling, regional center referral. Okay, like I don't know anyone who's gotten a house because they need a shelter, right? It's the service that they give it is akin, in my opinion, it is punishment. It is, when we talk about dignity and respect, the fact that every parent has to take a parenting class, even if they've raised 5 kids, even though most of these social workers don't even have their own kids and never raised a kid themselves, to me, is insulting. And there's this cookie cutter, one size fits all support that's given. And a lot of folks also lose everything when they're going through these cases. They lose any housing that they had. They lose, you know, any support system that they had. Sometimes their families are like, you're a bad parent, and their families don't want to support them, or their families are not allowed to support them, because if they support them, then if the child is placed with them, then, you know, the social worker will say, okay, we're not going to allow the child's going to go into the foster system without family, right? So no. And I don't want to get into too deep, but Going back to 1960, the whole point, the whole reason, and the whole structure of our modern day foster system, because it was also the first time the federal government funded the system, by the way, was so that they did not have to support Black families, brown families, right? Because at that time, only people who were eligible for support were white widowed women. Okay. So the government passed a law saying you can't do that anymore. You have to help everybody unless you take their children. And that was the architecture of our system. And I don't have time to get too deep into that because it's a much longer of a history lesson. But the system is not designed to support.
Yeah. There's one, I think we have time for one more question, Ebony. Yeah.
Maybe one, or maybe we can tackle these two last ones.
Okay.
I can read one of them. This person says, for people who decide to give birth at a hospital, do you recommend having certain things ready with you at the hospital in case the hotline is called and an investigation begins while still at the hospital?
Yes, your doula. No, like seriously, like your doula having, and that person, I've had doulas come testify because they are the witnesses that will say, you know, I educated this person regarding what their birth options were. They made an informed decision not to give the child vitamin K, or they made a informed decision, right, to, I don't know, not vaccinate their child, right? There's certain vaccines that you don't need, but the hospitals, they normally give these, but that doesn't mean that they're required. I also think having your prenatal records, right? So if you did receive prenatal care, you know, having at least having that person's contact information, having, you know, the things that you need for your children. If you are going to give birth in a hospital, oftentimes, you know, you stay a few days or whatnot, making sure that, you know, someone's taking care and putting together, you know, the nursery and all that stuff for you when you get home. Because they will go, they will go to the house and they will say, oh, mom doesn't have provisions. And it's like, well, it's just not set up yet. Right. But they will try to literally, I promise you guys, the case I was telling you with the family who, they had provisions at one of the grandparents' home, but not at their own home. And, the judge had to release to the dad, and the social worker was like, oh, we have to hurry up and go to the house before dad gets there so that they could document and say he didn't have provisions for the child. Okay, so that's another thing, is like you can get those things set up.
Thank you, Keisha. We have time for one more question. Do you know the reasons that explain the CPS and police's behavior? Is there an intervention effective to reverse the CPS or police's current behavior?
I don't know that I fully understand the question. Like why they're so violent when it comes to families?
Yeah, it sounds like that's what they're saying. Betsy, the person who said this question, feel free to come off mute if you want to explain your question. But yeah, I believe that's what they're saying.
So why do social workers and why do police, can you read the question again?
Yeah. Do you know the reasons that explain the CPS and police's behavior? Is there an intervention effective to reverse their current behavior? So like, why are their current behavior, why are they acting like that? Is there a reason why that police behaves the way that they do?
So we call it the family policing system for a reason, right? That is the experiences. I mean, it is the punishment of folks who may need, right? Because let's just be very clear. Because the other thing I always like to highlight is like, you know, even though we raised everybody else's kids in this country, right? this notion and this attack on like Black motherhood or parentage, or the fact that we can't raise our own kids and we need the police and we need the social workers to step in and raise our families is also crazy to me. But I think it is like, one of my slides said, like the new Jane Crow. It is a punishment of Black motherhood. It is an attack of Black motherhood. It is an attack of, the motherhood of Indigenous women and fathers and Latin women and fathers, and this notion that we cannot raise our own children. And not only that we can't raise our own children, I think it's deeper than that. Also that our children don't need to be raised by their parents. I have seen judges bend over backwards to keep a Caucasian child with their parent, and have petitions come in for the exact same thing, like domestic violence, for example, as just always vivid in my mind. One day where I had 2 cases come in, one white family, one Latin, and the judge bent over backwards so that that child would not experience the emotional trauma of being ripped from her parents. But with the Latin family, they separated them, right? And so it's also this notion that we, as Black children, don't need our parents, right? And again, not to get too deep or get into too much of history, but that is the culture of this country when it comes to family separation, right? Whether it was a separation of Indian children, right, or Native children from their families, Indigenous children from their families, Black families, right, during chattel slavery, right? That we don't need, our bonds are not sacred enough to protect. So I just think it's culture. It's built into the fabric of our country.
Thank you so much, Keisha, and thank you for this informative presentation. We really appreciate you being with us this evening.
Of course.
This is a resources page. Here's some resources that we want to share with you all. And I've seen some questions about the recordings being sent to you all. So for this webinar and the past 2 webinars that we had around birth options, we will be sending an email out to everyone with all of the resources, slides, and recordings after this webinar. So you will be getting that. Next, we have our evaluation. I'm going to put a link in the chat. Please take a few minutes of your time to fill out this evaluation to tell us how we did and to get more information from you all. And by filling out the evaluation, you will be entered into a raffle. We'll pick 3 winners at random to receive a $50 check. I'll put the link in the chat now. And thank you all so much again. Keisha, if you have any final words to close us off and to share your contact.
Absolutely. So the final words I'll say is this, kind of how I started this presentation, which is that we have work to do, right? And historically, we have always taken care of our own communities, right? And so if we see families who do need support, the support can come from the community, right? Not through violent government agencies. And so where we can support, I think we should. And as far as contact is concerned, I do provide free education, free information regarding rights as it pertains to the system, because I know that everyone does not have the, ability to invest in counsel. And so you can follow me on Instagram. My contact information is on the screen. You can also, call. This is my personal cell phone on the screen, y'all. Okay. So you can contact me. I may redirect you to the office line. But also on my website. So all of my contact information is here, and I would love to stay connected. And if you do reach out, please let me know that you were part of this presentation as well, because I do try to help where I can, even more with folks who are in community with us.
Thank you, Keisha, and thank you all again for attending, and I hope you all have a good evening.
Good evening.
Bye.